Writers can be very precious in a way that can make the writing so tremendous. This isn't a judgment, but people will spend years on a 8-page short story or something. That is not the tech world. I mean, even the publishing cycle is years. I sold this book 2 years ago, and I've been waiting years for it to come out. It's all so differently paced. And when I started writing, I found myself sending out pitches and query letters to agents with my novel, almost like A/B tests, where I was just seeing if they would reject me and wanting that data.
I'm thrilled to be speaking with Emily J. Smith, a writer and tech professional based in Brooklyn, New York. Her debut novel, Nothing Serious, published by William Morrow HarperCollins, is out now wherever you buy books. Emily studied electrical and computer engineering at Cornell and earned an MBA from UC Berkeley. She's led teams at top tech companies and nonprofits, and she's the founder of the dating app Chorus. Emily's writing has appeared in the Rumpus, Catapult, Slate, Hobart, The Washington Post, Vice, and other publications. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm so happy to be on. It's so great to talk to you.
You and I know each other from grad school, way back when, in a time when we were really just figuring out what our careers and lives might look like. And it has been so fun to follow your writing journey since then.
Oh, thank you.
You mentioned that you started writing in your early 30s with no formal training, and that you weren't even interested in fiction until your 30s. Reflecting back, what were either pivotal moments or clues along the way that led you down this path of writing fiction?
In my 20s, I was very heads down on climbing the corporate ladder. And I grew up poor and I just wanted to make money. That was my primary goal. And I majored in engineering because of that, even though I kind of didn't know what engineering was exactly, and just got the highest paying job out of college that I could so I could pay back my loans. And I read almost all nonfiction because that felt useful to me. And I didn't really get the point of fiction, which feels absurd to say now. And so to get to your question, I think I had to get a lot of that out of my system and kind of see how it worked and rise up in those jobs and prove to myself that I could do these things. And then, we met in business school, go through that business school period, get jobs out of that, and then realize, oh, okay, get a handle on, okay, this is what this world is. And if I play this game this way, I can do it. I can make the money. I can get the jobs. It allowed me to open up my eyes a little bit and just say, okay, aside from proving myself in these worlds, what do I actually want? What am I interested in? And it was only then that I kind of looked around. And I think also at the same time, we graduated in 2010. I think I started writing around 2012. Just little drafts on my computer, not telling anyone I was doing it. I was so mortified as an MBA and an engineer to think that I could possibly write something. The notion of spending my day writing felt so silly and embarrassing to me that I wouldn't tell anyone about it. But I would dabble. And at that time, social media was really blowing up. Feminism was gaining steam in a way that, at least when I was in college studying engineering, it definitely was not. It was not women empowerment, women's voices, stories, And so that woke me up to writing too, in a way where I actually started to be interested in it. And I discovered books by women. It sounds so silly because, of course, there are so many books by women, but I was surrounded by men in college. I wasn't exposed to those books and I wasn't interested in them. And then when I started reading those and became aware of Jezebel or these kind of more online feminist magazines, it struck me. It really struck me. And I was like, oh, I want to try and do that too. I mean, it's a very kind of later realization to that. I was in my 30s. A lot of people have that fire in them in their 20s. But yeah, it just took me a little longer.
Your novel features so many strong women. Edie, the main character, has an engineering degree from Cornell. In the novel, she's dealing with all these complexities and challenges of being a woman leader in tech and also in life. And then along comes this character, Anaya, who I certainly fell in love with right away. And I think that's kind of the point. She really draws you into the story, and there's other viewpoints from Leah and Alex. How were you able to channel your own exploration of feminism through these different characters?
You know, that is exactly what I was doing, like channeling my various explorations of feminism through these characters. And as you said, Edie studied engineering at Cornell. Like, she is very much my character. I refer to her, even though she's very obsessive and over the top and a little bit of a loon, but so I'm not going to identify too much, but she's very close to my heart. So she's kind of like young Emily. Like, that's how I think of it, and not very aware and still tied up in wanting men's approval because she grew up in that world, and tying herself, for example, to her longtime best friend and crush, Peter, who is a central character in the book, and his approval. And Anaya represents so many of the women that I met as I got into writing, whose writing impacted me so profoundly. And some of the early scenes of her meeting Anaya, or her getting an email from Anaya and just feeling like, oh my God, I have just like won an award. I have an email from this woman in my inbox. That's a very real feeling I had when I started interacting with these writers who had such different points of view from me and different experiences. And it really opened my eyes very quickly. So it was very important to me. I had actually written an entire other novel before this that was incredibly autobiographical, almost laughably so. And I poured my heart and soul into that book for 5 years, and it just got rejected by all the agents on the grounds that it didn't have enough plot. But it was similarly about a woman in tech who meets this older woman writer, and just like her life changes. So that was always going to be a very core component for me. With this new book, I gave myself the challenge to create a big, juicy plot, because that was the reason I was getting rejected all the time. So very specifically, I was like, okay, Emily, write a book with a murder in it. Like, that was the goal, which feels so cheesy, because it was. But then over time, I kind of realized how you can do that in a more complicated way.
Nothing Serious is already making the rounds. The New York Times listed your book as one of the 20 new books to read in February. Congratulations on this achievement. And exciting. They use the term rom-com for the novel, which you said was a bit of a stretch, and I completely agree. I found your book to be pretty genre defying. It's funny at times. There are a lot of serious topics like egg freezing and caring for aging parents and drug and alcohol abuse. And since you already said it, murder. I won't spoil anything for anyone who hasn't read the book yet. I did go back and look at some of your personal essays and nonfiction, more autobiographical writing. How was it different to explore these issues through fiction versus nonfiction?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for calling out the New York Times shout out. That was very exciting. And it was hilarious that they called it a rom-com. I kind of blame the cover, even though I love the cover, but it is giving a little bit rom-com vibes, maybe. Like I said, my entryway into fiction was incredibly autobiographical. I think because what got me into writing was this desire to unpack my own desires. Like, I didn't really know who I was at that time. and allowing myself to like spend time on the page and just dive through some of these issues that I was untangling for myself was the motivation. I don't come from, I don't have a poetry undergrad. Now I've learned to be very appreciative and interested in the language itself and the form and the beauty of that. But it's the ideas and the analysis of humanity and just relationships that like really pulled me in initially and continues to be the thing that I'm interested in the writing. So the essays kind of came first, as did that very autobiographical novel. And I had to teach myself through just practice to use my imagination for lack of a better description. I mean, there's something incredibly creative in nonfiction as well, but to make things up, to even say to myself, if a certain scene wasn't working, oh, and you can actually just make him go to this party instead. Like, it doesn't have to be based on that scene you're remembering from your actual life if it works better to do this. And obviously that opens up so much and allows you to get more playful. It is funny because my friend tells me I need to watch myself when I say I relate so deeply to Edie, because I do take like the dark parts of myself and just amp them up times 500, it's there's seeds there that are me, but there's so much fiction in it that I forget that I really allowed myself to play with quite a bit. And that was an evolution that came from reading more fiction and just pushing myself in certain scenes and practice.
I like this amped up character, that's what creates the drama in it.
Exactly.
And having lived in the Bay Area, having worked in the tech scene myself, the scenes in your book were, fiction, but so real, so realistic and, detailed down to, the street she's on in the outer sunset to, where they're going in the mission and all these places. Beyond having that lived experience of being in the tech scene, having lived in San Francisco, how do you think your work in tech as a product leader, as an entrepreneur, how has that enhanced your work as a writer?
Yeah, I love this question, and I love this podcast and the kind of appreciation for mixing of worlds. It was surprising. It surprised me the ways that my experience in tech showed up in my writing, because it's not obvious at all. But I found when I entered writing, and I can give a number of examples, but I'll just start with what first occurs to me. Writers can be very precious in a way that can make the writing so tremendous. This isn't a judgment, but people will spend years on a 8-page short story or something. That is not the tech world. I mean, even the publishing cycle is years. I sold this book 2 years ago, and I've been waiting years for it to come out. It's all so differently paced. And when I started writing, I found myself sending out pitches and query letters to agents with my novel, almost like A/B tests, where I was just seeing if they would reject me and wanting that data. And I would have friends that would wait years to send a single letter. And then they would send them all at once because it was ready. And I'm like, oh my God, no, I can't imagine. So things like that, I really brought kind of this tech spirit. And it wasn't conscious to me when I was doing it. It was only when I compared notes after with how writers, quote unquote writers with like a capital W who grew up in that world, did it, how different that was. And I was very appreciative for the tech mindset. I think that's how I got a lot of my early articles published, because I was really shameless about it. I was very just like, here's the thing. Oh, you don't like it? Okay, good to know this, and just keep repeating and iterating. I think a lot of my product work was this wasn't what it was called back in the day, at least as far as I know, but what's now called 0 to 1. It's building from scratch. That excites me so much. I have always worked on projects where we're building something new. And that same energy is in something like a writing project where you have an idea and you're bringing it to life. And it requires a high level of self-motivation. And it's also like very much on your shoulders, kind of. I mean, it's a collaborative process, and even writing can be too. But you really have to drive that and have a vision for it. And also have the confidence to know that you can actually make something from nothing. Like to be able to believe that you can make something from nothing. And so I think my experience in the tech and business world of like doing that a number of times allowed me to jump into this writing world and think absurdly, kind of, you have to be a little insane, like, oh, I can build this thing. If I put enough work into it and I put the pieces together and I figure out, I can build this thing. And so I'm very grateful for that too. That was certainly part of it.
Yeah, writing a novel is a big 0 to 1
big
project.
0 to 1. Yeah.
Let's take a moment to reflect on this question. When have you built something new, going from 0 to 1? Outside of hosting this podcast, I partner with leaders in the workplace to turn professional challenges into leadership successes and career progression. I love working with executive leaders, people managers, and of course, ampersands. If any of this sounds interesting to you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. That's JESSICAWAN. Now, back to the show. Let's get a little more into the publishing process, because I know there are authors and aspiring authors listening to this podcast. You share it took you 10 years of trying and failing, but you sold your book to a top 5 publisher. What would you like to share with aspiring authors about the publishing journey?
For me and my experience, other people might have a different experience, but for me, there were no shortcuts, which I almost liked. I've always kind of had this philosophy, even in getting jobs and stuff. It's not a meritocracy, because nothing's a meritocracy, like fully. But if you email agents, cold email agents, which is the process and what I did for years, they will read your pages and they will consider them seriously and respond. But I've had a lot of even like business school colleagues who have asked me, oh, how'd you get your agent? Or who'd you know? And it's not a who'd you know. Like, it is not that kind of world. That might be very different for a different echelon of writers or, but if you are coming from an entirely different space and entering this industry cold, it is totally possible, and people will consider your writing. They will read those query letters, but it is based on the work. It's not really a who you know situation. Especially for fiction. I will say that. For nonfiction, maybe if you have 500,000 followers on Instagram and you can get that's maybe a little more hobnobby of a world. But I kind of loved that about fiction. And like I said, I used it because with my first novel, I cold queried. And again, I'm not saying this as advice, as this is what someone should do, but just as an example, I cold queried 70 agents over the course of probably 3 years. And I had very meaty, real conversations with those agents who many of them read the full manuscript, really considered it. I could see as my writing got better, they considered the work more seriously. Like, you could just see how the quality of the work reflects. And so that's very motivating to me, that if I just create something, also because I was new to this world, everyone would say, why don't you just self-publish? Again, I'm not proud of this, to each their own. But for me, I was like, I don't know if I'm a good writer yet. I am still completely learning, and I am using these submissions as a form of understanding where I'm at. That said, obviously agents aren't like the be all and end all of what is good. Of course, they reject things that are good. But like for me and where I was at that time, it was a very informative process for me. And so what I would say is just like, keep going, keep focusing on the work and try and make the work good, and take classes. Oh my God, I met my best friends in writing classes. It was so helpful to take workshops. It's terrifying. I was so terrified when I first did it. I was so embarrassed that everyone would hate what I wrote. But these women I've been friends with for a decade, and they have kept me going. You need a community. You really need a community. And I did not have that. I had no writer friends when I started. I had no even very creative friends in the traditional sense. It was very much, my tech and business friends who are still so supportive, and I love them, and they've helped me along the way. But classes were so helpful to me. I'm wondering if there's anything else about the publishing process. I mean, once I got an agent, I got a deal from HarperCollins in 2 weeks. It was so quick. So it's so unpredictable. It's so arbitrary and unpredictable sometimes. I do think at certain points in the process, people are afraid to take a risk. Like you said, my book is very, you had said genre defying. I appreciate that. That's a huge compliment to me. And it was meant to be that way. But it makes it really hard to find someone who's willing to go to bat for that, because it doesn't fit neatly into the marketplace. And I think that's why it was so hard to get an agent. So yeah, you just have to keep trying.
Wow. Thank you for sharing so much of your journey. I'm curious, at a practical level, besides the wonderful community that you built around writing, what kept you going all these years? And also, how did you approach the process of writing while also working in tech companies, starting Chorus? Yeah, what did that look like?
I could talk about this so long, because I think it's so hard to embark on something like a book, especially a novel, where you're creating a whole different world and also work a full-time job. But most people have to. It's so rare that you get that time off. I wrote my first book while I was working in tech. And I think because I had just discovered writing, I say to people sometimes, I was essentially a 21-year-old, like in the sense that my writing life had just started. Like I was basically like an English major discovering like these feminist writers, and just high on the ability to like, oh, this new thing that's in my life. The energy I had at that time was unfathomable to me now. And I would wake up early, totally unfathomable to me.
Yeah.
And I would spend all my weekends. And I was I had, this is a large theme in my book and a lot of my writing, but I had been single for most of my life. And I was single then, and I was very unhappy with the dating scene, and I just stopped dating. And so the point is, I didn't have a partner or kids around. I really could just hole away and do my writing whenever I wasn't working. And when I worked on that first novel, that's what I did. And then I got to a point in my writing career where I decided, and this was a very intentional decision, and it has repercussions, that I was going to orient my life no longer around my career as it pertained to tech and business, but around my career as it pertained to writing. Mm-hmm. And that was like a very risky, for me, shift, because I had spent 15 years of adulthood getting all these, tails in my cap, or whatever the phrase is, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And working for that. And I was very afraid that not only just working for it, but spending tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars of money on these private degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very afraid that that would go to waste. And writing is the opposite of a lucrative career, and that, you know, it would be a terrible decision. Anyway, but I did that kind of knowing, again, I do clearly have a propensity for risk. I'm a startup founder, so there has to be something there. Knowing that I could always find my way back in. But that took a while. I was about 35 when I made that shift. And when I made that shift, I started taking chunks of time off to do the writing and then take consulting projects here and there. So it was a much more piecemeal life where I could work for a few months, save a bunch of money, and then take 6 months off and focus on my book. And that's actually how I wrote Nothing Serious. And I loved that. And it was fantastic. And now I've kind of done that since, more or less. I won't get into the details, but where I've like worked very hard for a chunk of period of time and then taken off. Like right now I'm in an off period. The book is launching and I'm taking time off from work. I'm not working now. If I were working now, I would be out of my mind, insane. Like it would be crazy.
Yeah.
And to be one more note on this, if you don't mind, when I had written this in an off period in 2019 after I finished a consulting gig, and I wrote the first draft in like this fever dream. It took 4 months. I had broken my foot. I was like house ridden and I got it all out. And then I got money for my dating startup fairly quickly. I started kind of like
wow.
talking to VCs. I mean, it was a few months, but I got pre-seed funding almost, sooner than I expected, oddly. And then I put the book away and I just did chorus basically full time for almost 3 years. And it felt absurd to work on a book while I was working on chorus because also it's other people's money. Like I felt so much on my back. It was my own startup. I wanted to make it successful. So I wasn't going to like hole away and just work on a novel while, I really wanted to make this work. And it wasn't until 3 years later, I finally kind of retired chorus, called a spade a spade. It wasn't working as I expected, but very proud of what we built and took this book back out. And then 3 years later, was like, oh, okay, I can make this good. And then that was another career break. So I spent about 4 months making it good and then started querying it and then got a full-time job in tech while I was querying it, which is a lot easier than actually writing it. So it's a lot of these balancing, like time off, time on, time off, time on. And that works for me because I'm a little bit of an all or nothing person. Like I want to go hard. It's hard for me to like moderately do something.
Yeah. I mean, these themes have come up so much on this show, and everyone kind of designs their ampersand in the way that makes sense, whether that is, weeknights and weekends for something and weekdays for another. But for something like writing, you need that dedicated time, and even just switching to that other part of yourself, that transition can take time.
Yeah. And it with a novel, especially, I found with essays, I squeeze it in and I love that. I can do it before work. With the novel, it's a whole other world that you're trying to hold in your brain. And it's very hard to do amidst a full-time job. I'm just re-emphasizing this because I don't want people to feel bad if they can't get through their novel while they're working a full-time job. It's so hard. And what's absurd about publishing is you have to have a full novel and a very high quality, complete novel to even start pitching agents. And so it's a lot to ask.
What do you think ties together the many parts of your work, whether that's tech career, entrepreneurship, writing?
I think it does go back to the creation theme. I think you really nailed it on the head. Building something from scratch is so energizing for me. I've always been into that. Even from a kid, I was like an inventor. Like that was what I always kind of identified with. And yeah, I think that process is very like analytical and creative. And I do like very much have that mix. And I'm sure, so many of your guests have that mix. They're so not mutually exclusive to me. Like there's so much energy between them. I also really, like I said earlier, I'm fascinated by humanity and relationships and just like how we work together and who we are. And Chorus was, a lot of my work has kind of sat at the intersection of human relationships as well in writing and in tech. So, but the creation thing is the big one.
Through these interviews, we are co-creating the Ampersand Manifesto. And these are principles for how to lead a multi-passionate life. What do you think should be included in the manifesto?
Allow yourself to take risks in your career. This might be cliche by now, but I only heard it like last year, where it's see your career not as a ladder, but as a playground, like jump around a little and take space. Like just follow. I had always heard this, follow your curiosity. I never thought I had like a passion. It took me a while to figure that out. Give yourself space and take risks. And that might seem like trade-offs at certain points in life, but those trade-offs are hugely worth it much of the time. So I think you don't have to squeeze it all in. You can try and just allow yourself those breaks to explore.
Emily, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Folks, you can learn more about Emily on her website and socials at MJ Smith. And Nothing Serious is available wherever you buy your books. We'll include links in our show notes. I had a chance to listen back on my interview with Emily, and I wanted to share a few key takeaways. 1, feminism is a journey you go through when the time is right. I really resonated with this. I've had friends in my circles who were on this path early, majoring in feminist studies in undergrad and having that fire in them in their 20s. My personal journey wasn't really until my late 30s, after I became a mother. And I'm continuing to learn, synthesize, and apply these ideas to my life. If you're interested in reading more feminist books or articles, my advice is to ask a trusted friend who's further along on the journey. 2, persistence and the long game. I'm in awe of Emily's commitment to her work. She poured 5 years into her first novel and then took the feedback that it didn't have enough plot, and she worked that into her next novel, which got picked up by a top 5 publisher. And this was after cold querying over 70 agents over several years. And I think that there's a lot to say about hard work, dedication, and perseverance. I totally get how a community is so helpful along the way of this journey. 3, what are you orienting your life around? I loved when Emily said she made the decision to orient her life around writing. This is an intentional shift. As we've brought up before on this show, writing isn't typically something you can squeeze in spurts at the end of a full workday, especially writing a novel. So making that intentional shift towards writing and away from the tech world, it can be scary and challenging and really a leap. But what I really loved is when she said she knew she could always find her way back in. Hopefully, life is long and we get chances to turn those dials and reorient ourselves towards what's really important for us at any given point in time.